Alright, so what's the plan? Do I analyze Avengers Endgame? Maybe the nuances of Hamilton and its use of motifs? Or... that works. Now, hold on a second. Yes, I know what this looks like, and I swear, this isn't going to be anything weird. I swear. This is part of the analysis. Really. Roll the intro! Hello, Internet! Welcome to Phil... Wait a second. Wrong show. My bad. Let me try that again. Hello, Professor! Welcome to my terrible attempt at literary analysis. Now, skits aside, this video analysis really is on this. But before you click off and fail me on the spot, I would like you to think about what your first impression is of what the show could be, given whatever prior knowledge you may have of Japanese media, of course. Done? Alright, now, if you guessed anime that might be very centric on things that won't really be thought-provoking, congratulations! You are exactly like the 99% of everyone who saw this exact same photo and thought the exact same thing. And I don't blame you, I was in the 99% myself. But give this show even just one episode, and it will absolutely captivate you. At least, that's what it did for me. This analysis will mainly focus on the first arc of the show, sporadically jumping in between arcs to make connections as necessary. The show itself is structured within 4 arcs, well, 5 between the show and the movie that I've yet to watch, sadly. Each arc focuses on a different person who deals with an issue called puberty syndrome. We'll get to the specifics of that in a second. Within each arc is approximately 2 to 3 episodes that play much like the acts of a book or film. As for the sound of the show, from a purely technical perspective, the sound of the show is decent. Nothing radically different by any means, but it does everything to the best of its ability. The interactions themselves don't really need any music due to the personality behind each voice in the show being quite solid, so much so that they could each carry a scene of their own. But when music does play, it punctuates the dialogue it coincides with, creating a powerful effect all its own, amplifying the current mood. In regards to rhythm, which I'll take as the pacing of it, the show is actually very well paced. Very rarely does it feel like it's dragging its feet in an attempt to fill as much time as possible. Conversely, despite the fact that it's around 4 arcs in a mere 13 episodes, it also never really feels like anything was cut, and that each beat within any given episode has a purpose. As for how it's arranged in content, there's a lot to discuss. The official literal translation of the show's name is actually Teenage Pig Doesn't Dream of Bunny Girls, which, it's not helping the show's case. But in reality, this title only refers to the first arc, and it actually has a major important story beat for the arc as a whole, but again, we'll get to that. The story begins on a cold open, a random moment in which a girl asks, "Want a kiss?" to which we hear a voice saying that she wasn't serious. We then cut to a guy lying in bed face down as he asks, "Who was that girl?" After reading a diary entry marked May 6th, I ran into a bunny girl in the wild. We then jump straight into the opening, which, as an aside, is actually really well made, foreshadowing many of the things to occur in the show. There's a YouTube channel by the name of Mother's Basement that did a video on it a while back, and I recommend watching it if you have the time. We then jump back to May 6th, and we see the aforementioned meeting with the bunny girl. We find out that this is Sakurajima Mai, or if you go by the usual American naming schemes, Mai Sakurajima. They're quite literally just reversed. Our protagonist introduces himself as Asusagawa Sakuta. Yes, these names are really hard and annoying to write and say, but they stick after a while. Mai warns him to forget about the encounter at the library, but as per usual plot standards, he doesn't. As we cut to the next morning, he asks, how can he forget that? This question will not age well, to say the least. At Sakuta's school, we get a lot more exposition about Mai, and as the episode progresses, we learn that she started to become more invisible to those around her, which is why she goes around in a bunny costume, to see who can and can't see her. And soon enough, it goes on to the point she no longer exists in people's memories. So they do the only logical thing they can. Go on a date to somewhere where people might still be able to see her. Now, have you ever heard of Murphy's Law? Well, it states that anything that can go wrong will. And boy oh boy did things go wrong. Despite their best efforts, everyone except Sakuta forgot Mai, and though they figure out sleep is what finishes the job with Futaba's help using existence theory, the idea that all things are determined to exist only when they're observed, it isn't enough. Well, save for Sakata, who fights to stay up for 3 days, documenting his journey with Mai in an attempt to ensure that even if he does forget her, he can't. Except, he does. Mai forces him to sleep with sleeping pills, and after a tearful goodbye, we've come full circle to the intro. We'll leave it here for the moment. Now, the show doesn't have a huge cast. The first episode alone introduces about 80% of the integral/recurring characters in the show, such as Sakata's little sister Kaede, his two best friends Kunimi and Futaba Ryo, as well as the slight mention of a girl named Makinohara Shoko. The interaction between them and our main man Sakata is absolutely refreshing, and it helps add a sort of wit and humanity to each one of them, as they have a bid to see who can keep the conversational high ground. A lot of these characters, save for Kunimi, experience some form of puberty syndrome. Now remember how I said I'd get back to that? Well, puberty syndrome is the general name for strange symptoms that one can manifest in the show, and is probably the largest driving force of the plot, and it's why this show stands out so much, aside from the characters of course. This puberty syndrome is actually connected to the character it's afflicting, which is what makes it so powerful as a plot device, because it makes each character an active one in the story, and makes it easy for everyone involved in the current conflict to experience some form of development. I'm sure that you're aware of these two forms of conflict, that being internal and external. Now in any story, the two experience some form of overlap in an attempt to strengthen the overall themes of said story, and puberty syndrome takes this idea to the extreme, making the internal conflict so powerful it bleeds out into reality, manifesting itself as an external conflict for whoever is afflicted. Some examples include acting so invisible that people can't see or remember you, trying so hard to make things go the way that you want that you literally end up rerolling each day, being so conflicted with two different sides of yourself you get split into two different people, the list goes on and on. The beauty of it is that these are all things that we may have struggled with at one point or another, and if not, at the very least, we can empathize strongly with it. Now, in addition to puberty syndrome, this show loves Chekhov's gun. If you haven't heard of it, it essentially goes like this. In the first act of your story, if there's a gun hung up on the wall, then by Act 3 you should use it, otherwise it shouldn't be there. The reason the rhythm of the show works so well is that in addition to the intrigue caused by puberty syndrome keeping your attention, it uses every second it can to set up everything that will be relevant down the road. Remember how I mentioned earlier that they name drop a character named Makinohara Shoko in the first episode? Well, it turns out that she's threaded heavily throughout the rest of the story, and yet within 7 minutes of the first episode, Sakata, and by extension the audience, gets teased about her in more ways than one. That's not the only thing the first episode does, however. It sets up the numerous ways that people have been affected by puberty syndrome, some of which come up later in the show. It also hints that a few of these characters aren't at all what they seem to be at first. For example, Kaede isn't just a stereotypical anime little sister because she just is. She underwent a lot of trauma that the first episode essentially loads the gun for later episodes to pull the trigger on. Another example would be a seemingly random throwaway event in the second episode involves an event that becomes the catalyst for the entire next arc just 2 episodes later. And we even see the character involved, Koga, pop up after this event in the next episode, near the climax of the first arc. Now remember how I said the title itself is a major story beat? Well, it also falls under Chekhov's gun, because in Mai's case of puberty syndrome, Futaba, who I should probably mention has a habit of calling Sakata a teenage pig, establishes that one cannot be conscious of anything when they're asleep. There is one case where this isn't exactly true, and that's when we dream. I think you can see where I'm headed with this. When we dream, we are very much aware of the things we dream of. That is until the dream ends, when we're forced up and all we're left with is a foggy memory. So remember how I left off at the end, where Sakata falls asleep and we come around to the intro of the arc? Well, do you remember how it started? It started with a moment that actually happened in the middle of the story, on Mai and Sakata's date. More importantly, Sakata dreaming about said memory, except he can't remember it at all, as evidenced by his first words after his eyes open. Thus, teenage pig doesn't dream of bunny girls. So to sum it all up, though the show may be named a bit too literally for its own good, it belies a much more complex, brilliantly written, character-driven story that deserves just a bit more attention than it got when it first came out. While teenage pigs may not dream of bunny girls, this one certainly dreams of getting an A. Thanks for watching.